Hi, it's Commodore Sam coming to you once again from LA, Lower Alabama. What I've got for you all today is a little bit of an ultimate experience, a little bit of an ultimate hardware project. Um, if you're familiar with the Commodore world and you hadn't been living under a rock, then you know the Commodore 64 Ultimates have been out for a little while. You may also know that the Commodore 64 Ultimate, prior to becoming a Commodore product, that line of motherboard that exists in here came from Gideon Schweitzer's Ultimate 64 project. And so Gideon's product and the Commodore 64 is truly ultimate in every way. It does things that bundles in features that the older vintage Commodore 64s couldn't do by themselves. They had add-ons, and in other words, you can add a disk drive, you could add even ROMs inside them. You could do a lot of things that mimic what the Ultimate does, but not all in the clean package that the Ultimate is. And one of the things that, for me, as you can tell from my drives and my collection, and from my other videos, is I really like disk drives. Most of the stuff that I do is mimicking things that you used to do in the 80s and the 90s, and not just playing games, right? Programming and some actual applications that you can use. Just the ability to move stuff around, that kind of thing. And so, some of the newer projects, though, like one that I'm going to kind of use as my use case, if you will, for this project, is C64 OS. C64 OS is a great operating system, but it points out one of the flaws, and really, in my opinion, the only flaw in a Commodore 64 Ultimate, and that is it doesn't have built-in CMD file system compatibility. Now, if you don't know what that is, that's basically in the 90s, CMD came out with various advanced peripherals for the Commodore 64, and the originals. And so in the 90s, you finally had this ability to have a hard drive, large amount of storage with files and folders and or directories, and all of that in a on a large hard drive. It was SCSI back then. Today's recreations of the CMD hard drive use, most people, you can still use a hard drive, but most people use SD. Inside there, they use a SCSI to SD, or a SD to SCSI, or a blue SCSI, or a Zulu SCSI type board in there, and use an SD card. Well, anyway, that's the way you do it externally, not emulated when you want to use a regular 64. And you can still use those products with the Ultimate. That's one great thing about the Ultimate, is that it has the ability to have all those peripherals hooked to it, but it has a whole lot of stuff built into it, built inside of it, into the firmware that's in here. And so, really, it's a shame that we don't have some of these large format hard drive style functionality built into the Ultimate. That's the one place where it's not Ultimate. They've been working on it, but it's not quite there. So what do we do right now today? You hook up a CMD hard drive, like the one I've got up here. I don't know if it's in the camera shot, but I have a CMD HD hard drive. The other thing that you do is you use maybe an SD2IEC style device, and you plug it in like and have a SD card in there. So you can do it that way. But the problem with these these devices, it just makes your Commodore less portable. In today's world, when you're using an Ultimate, one of the things that makes it an Ultimate is it's HDMI, and it doesn't have a ton of cords. It's all built in, and you can take it on vacation. You can take it to a vintage computer festival without having to bring everything that you own with it, right? So it does a lot of things. But when you start hooking things onto the, to the outside of it, it just gets messy quick with cords and everything else. And so the project today is we are going to take an SD2IEC and put it internally in the Commodore 64 Ultimate. Now, technically, I'm not going to put it in this Starlight. I'm starting this project is going to use its sister, or its big sister, if you will, and that is the Ultimate 64 Elite 2 that this was based on. We're going to put it in that, and so that's what the video is today. Installing an internal SD2IEC. And specifically the uIEC to /SD internally in our machine here. And just like with all things Ultimate, with the Ultimates, is Gideon pretty much planned on having that ability. So there's a header inside here that breaks out the port that you would normally plug an SD2IEC into, so it's actually got a header on the inside, and we're gonna see that. So let's get busy with that project. Okay, guys, I've got this set up here so that I can demo what this install looks like, so we're going to start out with me actually hand holding. So I apologize if there's any shakiness to this. I don't have a stabilizer to be able to get in here and see exactly what I want to show. And so what I've got here is, again, this is my Ultimate 64. It is in a retrofusion clear case, and it's got a mechanical keyboard, similar to the ones that are in here, but the retrofusion mechanical keyboard with some original Commodore keycaps on it. Internally, I've got some LEDs and all that. Again, the Ultimate 64 was, the Commodore 64 Ultimate was based off the Ultimate 64, so it's very similar on the inside. A little bit of a different shape, but other than that, it's got all the same components that the Starlight and others did. So one thing, the Starlight, of course, and I think it's a good show off. You of course have the matte finish of it, so it diffuses the light a little bit more than, say, this one does, this crystal one. That's just all a matter of taste. But anyway, other than that, this is very similar to this. So we're going to use this to do our demonstration, like I said, the Ultimate 64. And so what I'm going to show you is the install. I've already installed it, and so we're not going to go through the actual install, but I'm going to post, you'll see here that I'm going to post you the diagram and show you how this is all hooked up very specifically. But here we're just going to see it actually, see inside of it. So inside the Ultimate 64 here, and I'm going to do my best to hold this. I will open the hood, and you'll see a lot in here. But basically, the motherboard here is, again, very similar, but it is an Ultimate 64 Elite 2 board. So it's very similar to what is in the Commodore 64 Ultimate, but it does have a few differences. For one thing, it's black instead of white, but and the board is a little bit shorter. So in this particular case, it does give me a little more room to do some other install in here, right? So first of all, so what we're here to see is not the Ultimate, because that's hopefully what you may want to install something in your Ultimate. You know what an Ultimate looks like, both white or black, or Commodore 64 Ultimate, or Ultimate 64 by Gideon. So this is a version of SD2IEC. This specifically, the one that I'm installing here is the uIEC slash SD from Retro Innovations. Now you can buy it in two forms, or well, it's really one form, but you can buy an extra board for it for hooking this up externally. So, but what I've done here is I wanted to put it internal, right? Because I didn't really need an external access to the SD card, and I will explain why in a little bit later. But basically, I've got it here, and it has extra. You'll notice that only some of the pins. So I've got these DuPont wires running over here to this header that is in the right behind the IEC port on the back of the device. There's a header there, and there'll be a diagram shown for you to tell what the pinout is on that header, and that header is feeding the IEC signal to this SD2IEC. Now you'll notice I didn't use all the pins on the uIEC, and that is because those pins are the pins that typically go to the buttons and all of that. And I don't need the buttons. So typically on an SD to IEC, you have forward buttons and back buttons to switch disks and that kind of thing. In my particular use case, I'm using a C64 OS, and I'll show you that. You see this card here. This is the C64 OS. It says version 1.07, but I've actually upgraded it to version 1.08. And so this device only, this operating system doesn't need to do disk swaps and that kind of stuff. So I had no need for hooking these other buttons, the buttons up or anything like that. But you certainly could, wire up all of these pins. I didn't need to. I only needed the power and the IEC pins. And so the power and the IEC pins are all coming from this header over here. So that header not only provides the IEC signal, but it also provides the 5 volts and the ground that's needed to power this uIEC. And so that's what we've got inside. And so now I'm just going to change. I'm going to hook this up and let you see what it looks like in operation. Okay, guys. One of the things I want to point out before we go too much further is I'm using Jiffy DOS. I know a lot of you like to use other speeders that are faster in some rare, in certain instances, and you're used to those, and by all means use what you enjoy using. But if you want to talk about standards, when from a disk drive standpoint and from a speeder standpoint, Jiffy DOS is the most standard available from the day speeder there is. Are there faster ways to load games, single file games? Yes. Are there faster ways to navigate disks and do and multiple drives and to really do some semi-real work on a Commodore 64? I don't believe so. Most of the others have too much drawbacks, whether it's Dolphin DOS or Jaffe DOS or any of those. They mostly have too many drawbacks. The only drawback that I know of that Jiffy DOS really has is it does, like a lot of things like some of the others, it does disable the tape drive. But when you're going to load a tape, you can very easily disable Jiffy DOS. It's not hard, right? So if you want to have Jaffe DOS, Dolphin DOS, or any of those, you can flip back and forth and only use Jiffy DOS when you need Jiffy DOS. That's perfectly acceptable. I personally just don't like to have to switch all the time. Plus, I hardly ever use a tape. And so therefore I have no need to do a lot of switching. Jiffy DOS does everything that I want it to do. So I'm just getting that out of the way to begin with. So since with CMD products, like the FDs, like the HDs, the CMD HD hard drive, like not a CMD product, but based on a CMD product, the uIEC or SD2IEC. Jiffy DOS will speed that up. It's made to work with it, and it'll be the most compatible thing that you can use with it. Jiffy DOS will speed up our operations, and so I'm going to use a lot of the Jiffy DOS commands, and besides that, so but just know you can use loads and all that like you've normally done, that kind of thing. But what I wanted to show you is the way that I set up this SD to IEC / really it's a uIEC / SD version of it. I set it up as drive 14. And you're like, how did you do that? Why did you do that? Right? Well, I just wanted to keep it out of the way of other things that I would hook up externally. I didn't want to hook up externally a drive and not be able to easily, and it get in the way of having this internal SD to IEC. I really only have this internal SD to IEC to really provide one function, like a hard drive. I'm not trying to load the games and all the games and stuff like that. You're better off using the other drives that are built into the device to do some of that other stuff, right? So anybody that says, why don't you DMA load the games? Well, you should. Why don't you use carts, CRT files? You should. But there are certain functions that when you want to emulate a disk drive that really all you want to do is access a large folder with a lot of files in it. And the soft IEC is great. It will let you put a large number of files in it that's built into the Ultimates, but it does not allow you to do standard navigation of those of that structure the way that everything that was built. So if you think about it, back in the day when CMD came out, it was the standard, right? Well, today all the software that used to use that standard for large volume data still uses that standard, and so it won't work with soft IEC. So many things don't work with soft IEC that it's really not useful for me, at least. So I don't even use it. It stays off. I use SD to IEC or a CMD product in addition to that, and with Jiffy DOS loaded, then I have most everything. It's all external. So I wanted it internal. But putting it in internal, I needed to make sure that if I put something on external, I didn't interfere. So I chose 14. Now on Commodores, you pretty much have for disk drives everything from 8 all the way up to 30 or 31. I don't remember which one it is, but it's so many that you'll never get there. But I chose 14 because to me it set in the sweet spot. Normally a CMD hard drive is sitting at number 12. I think the IDE 64 uses 12 and 13. And then the RAM link uses 16 as its drive number. So for me, the 14 just kind of sat in a sweet spot. I didn't have anything for it to interfere with. So in Jiffy DOS, if you want to look and see what all drives you have, you can hold down the control and you can just hit D and it toggles through all the drives and shows you what's available, right? So I've got a drive 8, drive 9, a drive 10, a drive 11, and drive 14. So 8 is this external SD to IEC. 9 is the internal drive A of this Ultimate. 10 is this CMD FD 4000, and 11 is the GFD 4000. And so that's so what I'm going to show you now is if I hit F1 here, you'll see that it shows the directory, and right now it's showing the directory of 14 because when I did the Control D, I toggled to 14. And then when you hit F1, it does a directory, non-destructive directory, and it shows, again, that's a Jiffy DOS feature, and it shows everything that's in that folder. So in this, I showed you earlier, I'm in the SD drive of 14, I have got this 64 OS. So I'm going to run 64 OS. So there's multiple ways I could do this. I could use the load command and just type it out. I could type load up here and load it, right? I could use various ways of doing it. I could have just down below hit up arrow asterisk and hit enter, and it would have loaded the first file on that disk. So there's all kinds of things I could do, but if you had like a big list of things that you wanted to do, you would just, with Jiffy DOS, come to the line that you want to run. You would hit the up arrow, which is next to the up arrow character, not the cursor, but the up arrow character next to the restore key on a standard keyboard. And you put that on the first line. You don't have to get rid of the 7. You don't have to do any changes because we're actually on drive 14. I hit enter after putting in that up arrow, and it starts running C64 OS. Now, just for I didn't mention it earlier, but I've got a mouse on here with a mouster that's going to operate the mouse on C64 OS. And I'm not really going to give you a big demo of C64 OS, but I would point out it's version 1.08. Other people have done demos on it, but it is a great operating system. And for me, having it internal on here is a really sweet way of doing it, because when I take this to a vintage computer festival or a friend's house or a VCF or a Commodore computer club, all of those things, then I'm able to just pick this up along with the power and an HDMI cable, and as long as where I'm going has HDMI, then I'm all good. But I will say this: one of the great things, in my opinion, on C64 OS is the fact that it's got a great file manager. And so if you navigate to wherever, so I just went to drive 11 here, and here's the files that the folders and the files that are sitting on that disk that's mounted in my GFD 4000. So right now I'm running off of the operating system sitting in drive 14. So if I wanted to, and you'll notice that it says SD2IEC, that's because the uIEC is compatible or mimics in every way an SD2IEC. It's just a little more compact and nice in that respect. Also, you'll see another SD2IEC. That's that one up here, that I have in there as well, and it's just got a bunch of files in it that it's just basically my junk drive. Got some stuff on it. I don't have anything mounted on the 1541 or don't have anything loaded in the 10. But main thing is I wanted to show you, this file manager that's in C64 OS is pretty sweet. And since we're talking about disk drives, I wanted to talk about that. So if I wanted to copy a file from one of these other directories over here, and I wanted to put it on, copy it from one drive to another, one of the great things about C64 OS is, I've got these tabs up here, and so I could go to this second tab here, and right now it's in the folder of the applications folder in C64 OS, and over here on tab 1, I'm sitting here in the root directory of the SD2IEC on 14. So if I wanted to copy a file from here over to 2, I could simply do that. It's easy to do, right? So I'm not going to go through all the features, but it's a great file manager. The main thing that the purpose of this video though, is to say with an internal SD2IEC, it takes away the one thing to me that doesn't make the ultimate, and that is having a standard, and when I say standard, I mean the standard of the day, and still the standard today, file system based on CMD, the CMD file system structure, right? There is no other more compatible file structure than that in today. And even if someone created one, like like Gideon did with the soft IEC. If someone creates one and doesn't make it compatible with CMD, they automatically put it behind the ball on all the other software out there that actually will support it. And so it's again the only thing that needed improvement. And so now I have improved it. I've improved it because I've added it into internally in the Ultimate. Now my Ultimate 64 to me is truly an Ultimate. So that's all I wanted to show you guys. And again, check the links down below. I'll have links to the uIEC. I'll have also the diagram that I have that shows you the pinouts and how you wire it up. It's really simple though. All you need is you'll need Jiffy DOS if you really want to make it nice. You don't have to have it, but if you want to make it nice, it needs it. You need the uIEC. You need 7 female to female DuPont wire jumper wires, and of course you got to have an Ultimate. So that's what you have to have. So I hope y'all enjoyed that look at my install of the uIEC in a Ultimate 64, which, remember, again, works the same way. The same header exists in the Starlight or the Commodore 64 Ultimates, so that same header is in there as well. The only thing that would be different on the Commodore 64 Ultimate is if you're, if we go back and look at, this board here being short, I mounted it up here on the plastic part. On the Commodore 64 Ultimate, this board comes all the way up here to the edge, but it does have a lot of blank space on it. So you could certainly either put a bracket and put it on top of the board, or you could put a small amount of double-sided tape or something. You need to secure it in some way, shape, or form, so you don't have a piece of metal floating around inside your computer. So that wouldn't be good. Anyway, that's all I've got for you today, and thank you for watching.